Welcome back, everyone. Now we're moving to buildings and architecture for a fantastic next session. It's called Radical Retrofitting. It's delivered in partnership with Purcell Architects, who are based here in Manchester, amongst other locations. Our moderator is Jonathan Irawan, who is one of our Design Council experts, and he's also computational design lead at Hassell Studio. Over to you for this next session.
Thank you, Minnie. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for those joining us here today and also online. So yes, for the next 45 minutes, I'm happy to host this amazing session with these guys around radical retrofitting. And I think it's a really crucial topic for us to talk about, especially when we're talking about the built environment. It's one of those key interventions that we need to do and ethos to effectively address the climate and biodiversity emergencies. So with that in mind, I wanted to run some brief introductions for everyone online. So I'm joined on my left by Gemma Birchall. She brings her wealth of expertise over 2 decades as an architect, especially in the projects around historic reuse and also new build schemes throughout the UK. She currently sits within Purcell Architects, who's known for a lot of their heritage conservation and as well as the historic fabric restoration and repair, which you may have seen a lot of their projects throughout the region, as Minnie was mentioning. Then we're also joined by Nick Johnson. He's a man of many talents and many hats. So I think he's very well renowned for delivering an uptake of some of UK's most challenging and ambitious regeneration projects throughout his time in his previous roles in Urban Splash, in the Escape Commissioner, and Marketing Manchester. And now I believe you've taken on a bigger challenge of transformational change within the region, running a lot of the notable markets within the region as well. And last but not least, I'm joined by Dr. Adebowale. She is also a fellow Design Council expert and ambassador, who's a sustainable strategist and does a lot of work with, brings a lot of expertise effectively in the intersection of design, policy, water management, flood alleviation, amongst other things. She also sits at the Northwest Forestry and Woodlands Advisory, as well as the Regional Flood and Coastal Community within Northwest. So before the wider introductions for them, I wanted to kind of kick off the discussion and say, Gemma, what does radical retrofitting mean for you and in the context of your work? And then we'll kick off to Nick and Teo at the end.
Yeah, thank you very much. So just as well as my work at Purcell, I also am a tutor at Manchester School of Architecture, which is a joint course with the Manchester University and the Met. So it's really lovely to be here today, especially this is the university I went to over 20 years ago now, so it's great to be back in the building. So radical retrofitting to me, well, retrofitting isn't a new concept. We've been adapting our buildings throughout history. You know, as society has evolved, technologies adapted, and needs have changed. It's only been recently that, in recent years, that the retrofit term has been synonymous with climate change and the ability to change. And our work at Purcell as conservation and heritage consultants can sometimes be seen as kind of not sitting alongside sustainability, especially when it involves visual interventions into historical buildings. Yet as a practice, we really believe that for the future resilience of historical buildings, that it's important that we do retrofit and that we adapt our buildings to the needs and requirements of the modern day. On the reel behind me, and I'm assuming it is playing in the background online as well, is just some examples of the practices, some of the examples of the projects that the practice has within Manchester region and within the north. Many of them might be familiar to anybody that is from Manchester. London Road Fire Station, which we took a couple of people round yesterday, which it has brought back to a building that's been derelict for 40 years. With radical intervention and new build elements within that. Then we have Salford Cathedral is one of the other images that are kind of going around on the reel, which is aiming to be one of the greenest cathedrals in the UK. We're currently on site with that one, again requiring radical retrofit in terms of upgrades to the roof and windows. And then finally, one of the other images that is going around on the reel is Hull Maritime Museum, which is going to be one of the first passive house visitor centres in the UK. So really that ambition to kind of drive forward climate change within historic and new build environment. For me, it is being bold with the retrofit, in both those building types.
Thanks, Gemma. And Nick, what does radical retrofitting mean for you?
I'm not entirely sure. And it's curious that I find myself here because I officially divorced myself from the built environment in 2012. And it's quite interesting to be asked some of these questions that I probably haven't considered for quite some time. And I think the perspective that I can probably bring that might be of a modicum of interest, it stems from my background, because I have a confession that I qualified as a chartered surveyor many years ago. And one of the things that profession teaches you, or some of the education that supports that profession, relates to the way in which we value buildings, or value per se. And I think one of the issues that I suppose that I confronted in my previous life and continue to run over in my mind is how we are able to ascribe value to working with things we already have. And in a way that's also the right thing to do for the environment. And the problem is that not only is there no value added from working with an existing building, it's often far more costly to work with an existing structure. But there is no... Also there's a legislative framework that really mitigates against architects or people who want to work with existing buildings, bringing them back into life. So there are many major impediments, I think, that need to be discussed and removed in order to facilitate a far easier way of going about working with existing buildings. And I suppose the buildings that, since I renounced my past in 2012, the buildings that we have operate now within are all historic buildings. 3 of the 4, or 2 of the 4 are listed, certainly. And I suppose the way I translate value added through in the business that I now find myself in is that those existing buildings are particularly charming. And they have an attraction from the get-go, really. The wear, the patina of those buildings and our reuse of them, often dysfunctionally because they don't work perfectly because you're working within the confines of an existing building, are charming. And because we operate them and because we rely on people coming to our buildings to enjoy a social experience, then I suppose I'm able to translate it through to some extent in added value. But I think that issue of value added to working with the existing built environment is a very critical one.
Thanks, Nick. And Dr. Teo, in your line of work, do you see radical retrofit as in line or in contrast?
Before I say anything, I'll just say what an honour it is to be here at the 4th of these events. Having been invited to the first one, it is just amazing. So well done, Design Council, 4 years on the trot. Get back to what you asked me. I was thinking about this, radical retrofitting. And what I'm going to say might sound a bit surprising, but to me, when I think about radical retrofitting, it's not so much about the radical, but it's about how the community in which that building is based loves that building, uses that building, appreciates that building, and has also had some input in that building. They've been asked about what they want and why and how they're going to use it, and they love that building. So when it comes to sort of the examples I can show you in terms of what I think are radical, you might look at it and think, oh, why is it radical? But it's radical to me because that building has been loved possibly for centuries, and people and experts and communities have got together and come up with a scheme which is sustainable in terms of the environment, the economics and the social, and have meant that that building is loved yet again. And it's the loving a building yet again with features from the past that make me really excited. So let's see if we can see one of them. You might recognise that. Some of you that live in Manchester. There's the Victorian baths in Longsight, which was going to be knocked down. And this is seen as a sort of icon of Longsight. I could speak a lot about Longsight. But it's fantastic that there's a beautiful building like that. And if you have a chance to actually go in, it is amazing. And it's something that Longsight and the community and Manchester can be very proud of. And it shows the best of municipal design and architecture from centuries ago that is still wonderful now. I was actually involved in this building, and one of the things I liked about this building is when we were trying to think about how it was going to be used by the community, we invited the community in to say what they wanted, including school children. And I was one of them that did some of that, and it was wonderful. And every time I go past it, it makes me smile. So we move to another one. Now this is cheating actually, but it's cheating for the reason, yeah? So this is the Maggie Centre in Manchester, which is just down the road, which is not retrofit. But the thing I like about it, which I think is important to any retrofit, a radical retrofit, is this includes the architecture of health, and it combines the best of architecture by bringing the outside in. So from every angle, you can see some bit of green of the environment, and it's built to make you feel good. And if you get and the important bit about why I tried to slide it in without you noticing is that all their buildings are based around a sustainable brief. So whatever building they work on with whoever contractors, community, they stick to that sustainable brief, and that can apply to old buildings as well. And I love the way they do it. If you get a chance to look at Maggie's website, it goes into more detail and it actually shows you the brief that is used. And then my final picture is the art house in Wakefield, which some of you may or may not know. And that building used to serve as a library. And many people who grew up in Wakefield loved that building. It had a separate children's library, so it was loved by the community back then. Now it's been converted into sort of an art house, lots of different things for the use of the community, refugees. It's just sort of rich, and the design in it is beautiful, and they've kept a lot of the old but mixed it in with the new. And again, it's something that's really takes pride within Wakefield. And I also like the way that it actually brings a lot of green, both outside and inside the building.
Yeah, it's very important to see that, and all the examples that you've shown, again, has this cultural and historical significance in the community. And in that sense, I guess, how do you think we should evolve our design process and delivery process to have them involved and more inclusive and more evenly distributed throughout all these, the region even, in this work? So
I think one of the challenges in terms of getting input from the community is the cost. And that's, in my opinion, in the years I've worked in this industry, is one of the reasons why it's perhaps not done, let's be honest, as well as it perhaps should be. But the benefits of actually getting the people within the community to have a say in what they want, rather than having things being done to them, is huge. And one of the key benefits is that those same people within the community will look after that building. They will feel that building is theirs and it serves them. And it's just a joy to be able to go into a building like that. It actually sort of speaks to you and it wraps its hands around you when you go in. And that is radical to me and beautiful.
yeah, and it must be the same for you, Nick, when delivering or running the operations of these markets, and where you said like listed buildings, of where the communication of value to the community is so important. Have you found that that process of involving them or presenting the idea creates this additional value, or how would you frame the value of these interventions, let's say?
I suppose, you know, over the years I've been involved with a lot of community consultations around the built environment. The final one was in New Islington, just to the north of the city. And over the years I realised it was very important when you're working with the community is to manage their expectations, because the worst thing that you can do is go in with a blank sheet of paper and say, what do you want? Because they'll only ever be disappointed. And I think we were able to do that to some extent in New Islington by going and having a cup of tea with people, sitting down and giving them options, but not giving them the complete opportunity to say what they wanted to do there. I think in the buildings that I then went on to deliver on the other side, there's no direct request for community involvement or participation other than visiting those buildings out of choice, your own choice, to spend time in an environment with other people sat around a table eating decent quality food. It seems pretty a fundamental human part of life, and really reworking important buildings and giving them public access without recourse to public funding, and with the duty to maintain those, because it's integral to the function of our business, aligns a number of objectives. And I think the community aspect of working with those buildings has been pivotal to the impact that we have had, because I think any visitor to any of our operations can enjoy them at an entirely superficial level, which is having a nice plate of chips. Or you can dig a little bit deeper and try and find out why it is the way it is, or what's happened to make it so. And one of those critical aspects has been providing a space for people to participate and be part of some pretty important existing buildings.
Yeah, and that's incredibly important also, probably coming from another architect, where the stakeholder consultation sometimes happens at the end or at the front, where you're presenting half-baked solutions. Is there sort of a soft landings approach where you're like, okay, you're about to become custodians of the next generation of the building, right? So.
Definitely so. I think our most successful projects are the ones where they do have community engagement at the very early stages. So even at stage 0, when it's part of the briefing, a great example of that we're currently working on is the Portico Library within Manchester, to reunite all floors of the Portico Historical Library back through the building. And they involved the existing visitors in consultation during the briefing stage to get their input, insights for what their vision would be for the building, you know, what their aspirations would be, what challenges they would like the library to address. And that has been so rewarding and has led into the vision and mission statement that the library has now established as part of the brief, which is to be the most sustainable, accessible key feature, accessibility throughout the building, and dynamic building library within the UK. So yeah, that early engagement has been really rewarding and will hugely benefit that project. And having that, as you say, that kind of cycle of design development and then meaningful public engagement at stages in the project where actually what is being communicated back to you from the community can be evolved into the design process as well. So throughout the stages, not leaving it towards just before planning, I think is key.
Yeah, no, it's key. And, these are communities are going to be affected as our climate catastrophe worsens and worsens every time. So I think to not have their input in the development is a crucial mistake. And given the recent events of the floods and throughout Europe, and especially in Spain, some people would question the role of retrofitting against the mitigation around climate crisis, especially from like a resilience point of view, where a lot of our existing building stock, 80% of it will exist in 2050. So in preparation for that, is there a duality there, or they effectively should be looked at the same when it comes to performance? And what happens to our buildings that aren't fit for purpose? And how would you start to tackle those?
Yeah, whenever we're retrofitting historical buildings, we always look to any improvements that we do make that they increase the lifespan of the building for a further 100, 150 years. And that often involves the more deep retrofit, especially around roof upgrades. So, for example, our Salford Cathedral and Hay Hall projects, both of them involved intensive alterations to gutters, roof works, improvement to the fabric. And that does need to be considered very carefully when it comes to listed buildings. It's been positive to see the positive response that Historic England have had to those kind of the need to upgrade historical buildings for that longevity, to ensure that the asset is there for the future. And they do see that as a public benefit now. So that's great. And yes, I think we have to continue to make sure that buildings are fit for modern purposes. Yeah.
Yeah, and Teo, in your role around this, making sure the buildings last for a long time, and the water management aspect and the flood alleviations. Where does that, kind of tensions lie in that?
Well, perhaps I could come at it a slightly different angle. So I worked on the North West Regional Flood and Coastal Committee for 10 years. It sounds like a sentence, doesn't it? But I sat on there for 10 years, and actually it was amazing, because some of the things, sometimes I think you have to be brave and bold, and you see something and you think, well, that could be made more sustainable. It could serve the community and people better. How can that happen? Well, it can happen when you think about preventing, reducing flooding by designing flood alleviation schemes. But at the same time, you think, well, we're building this flood alleviation scheme to reduce the impact of flooding, but what are the additional sustainable benefits that we could get from better design of that scheme? How could we make sure that it could be heritage buildings, houses, and not just protected in terms of the material aspects, but how can it also build on other issues like biodiversity or the community's health, etc., etc. And by thinking about these things earlier on, you can design these in. So when we talk about sustainability, we're then talking about it having greater impact in terms of the economics. Which other actors are you helping by ticking their boxes, for example, with health, and same with biodiversity. But you can also, at the time, we looked at the existing legislation, which was around looking to see how many houses could be protected by that scheme. And then we worked hard so that eventually, not only we were looking at the number of houses, we're looking at the businesses, we're looking at the impact of health, etc., and getting additional investment in there because we were working with others and helping them to tick their boxes as well.
Right. Very good. Yeah, and that next generation of upskilling and ensuring that the skilled workset is ready is a key one, right? So
essential. But now that you see, but that does happen because now that's a norm. So now when you talk about designing a flood alleviation scheme, that is the norm. And a fantastic example I always mention, if you get a chance, is to look at the Salford wetland flood alleviation scheme. There's a little video on the internet. And it's beautiful, and the way the people in that community talk about it, the benefits for them, it's just wonderful.
when in your operations, like of these markets and in the change of the thinking or like making it more hyper-local, are you seeing that bleeding into the workforce and a training program to ensure the next generation of custodians, or you can replicate the similar models within the area is happening around?
Okay, I'll come to that in just one second.
Sure.
I was just thinking about about flooding and rivers, and I suppose I have another confession that I'm and have been for the last 40 odd years an avid canal boater.
Oh, we should talk about that. I used to be on the canal and river
right,
transport.
okay.
There we
well,
go.
that's the question.
Yeah, okay.
At the moment, my canal boat is being repainted in Northwich, which, and one of the guys there sits as an engineer on the committee for the, I don't know which part of the organisation it is, but Northwich is pretty well known for its flood problems. And he tells me that the real issue is the silting up of the bed of the river, the Weaver. And I suppose the problem that I have with a lot of this is that we are all victims of privatisation, which started in the Thatcher era but has accelerated through every successive government as governments try to divest themselves of their responsibilities and the costs that go with it. And that's a prime example, I think, because he tells me that I don't know who actually owns the watercourse, but the Canal and River Trust operate the boats and the stuff that sits on the water, but the actual walls of the river are owned by the Environment Agency, I think it is.
It's quite complicated.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be complicated.
Yeah, it is.
But the reason why the flooding occurs is partly to do with issues relating to the destruction of the environment, and but it's also partly to do with the way in which we have fragmented responsibility so that everybody can put their hands in the pockets and walk away when they're asked to put money towards dealing with the roots of the problem. So the Environment Agency, and forgive me if I'm maligning them, because it might not be them, but whichever organisation owns the riverbed will not accept the responsibility for the costs of taking away the silt, which has historically always happened. And so this fragmentation of responsibility is an issue that's been ongoing for 40 years, and we are beginning to fundamentally feel the effects of it. It's not just obviously in the relation to the water industry, it's across the whole of the many of the privatised once government-owned utility infrastructures. In terms of where we're headed with training and kids that are coming through, it's really difficult. You know, I'm a father of 4 daughters, and I'm the only one who separates waste in his household. The rest of them can't be asked. And yet these are the kids that have grown up with the education that suggests that they should be far more aware than I am of the implications of their actions. And yet I can't get them to do the fundamental thing that's necessary that they have some control over. So I'm slightly worried about where the phrase, one of my favourite quotes, and I can't tell you who the quote is, but it is, we judge others by their actions and we judge ourselves by our intentions, you know, we're all hypocrites. And they are, you know, although unwittingly they don't recognise it, they are part of that process. And how we're able to communicate that through to the next generation when it's actually terribly unsexy to do the things that are necessary to protect the environment for the future is quite difficult.
And yeah, that's, you know, building upon your point about these silos and challenges and the key interfaces between who owns what and playing hot potato in terms of, yeah, whose responsibility is it? Are there certain potential levers or mechanisms that you can think of as a design solution where it starts to break down those sort of rules?
It's not a design solution. It's sitting around the table with, it's exposing these as being some of the fundamental reasons, because I think a lot of people don't understand why things are the way that they are. It's like the rail network, you know, the government gets billions of pounds in revenues from auctioning off the right to operate the profitable lines, and so divest itself of responsibility and generate revenue. And I think we forget sometimes, you know, it's the hospitals. You know, one of the reasons for the crisis in the NHS is because of the PFI initiative that was started under Thatcher, that's gone on through successive governments, was accelerated immensely through the Blair-Brown administration. And now we're footing the bill for decisions to try and deliver schools and hospitals off government balance sheet through the private finance initiative. And you know, these are some of the fundamental tenets as to why we face the problems that we now face. And unless we begin to understand that, we're not going to be able to unpick the real reasons why we are where we are. And I think it's really not an issue that relates to design, although maybe it is. Maybe it's the design of the architecture that supports the way in which these systems now operate. The problem is that once the genie is out of the bottle, once these industries are sold off, we've seen it in Greater Manchester with the way in which the bus network was privatised, and the difficulty that Andy Burnham's had to try and wrestle those contracts back into one operator, which is a problem, of course, that London never had, because Thatcher insisted that all the other regions had their networks privatised, but London didn't. And of course, which network continued to exist with amazing efficiency? It was London, because everything was controlled through one entity. And where did it fall apart? Well, everywhere else but London, because the ownerships were fractured and the routes were given to others. And I think some of those fundamental issues are the reason why we are in the place that we are in relation to many of the issues in the built environment.
Okay, thanks. We're going to quickly move on to some of the online questions, and it's really nice. The first one for the panel here, so it's easy to see why we want to restore and maintain beautiful heritage buildings made out of high quality materials. But how can designers bring value through retrofit to more modern structures that were not intended to last, let's say, of the more current recent era? Do you want to have this?
Yeah, as a practice, we aren't just looking at historical buildings, you know, in terms of ones that are older than 1919. We do look at modern, so concrete construction, or the information recently about RAP. In terms of how we can improve that, we're constantly trying to upskill our workforce to appreciate how we can retrofit and upgrade more modern construction. Whether it is a modern building or a historical building, it is coming from that same point of knowledge and understanding and appreciation of what the construction method is, what limitations there are, how it can be adapted. That is true for both. So I think we approach both challenges in the same way, really.
Yeah, and building on the back of that, you know, in our practice, we try to maximize the residual value of every building through like circular economy principles, and there's a lot of good materials that shouldn't be just demolished and binned at the end of the life cycle. Well, so yeah, and for you guys, do you see any, you know, for your restoration of buildings that are not loved?
You know, it's bloody difficult working with the existing fabric and the existing environment. One brief example was when we were converting the market at Altrincham, and I had provisionally acquired all the flooring from Chelsea Barracks to go into Market House at Altrincham, and it was a hit and miss sanded floor. It was full of character. It was highly imperfect, and of course the representatives for the local authority, for them it didn't meet any of the health and safety requirements, and it didn't meet any of the requirements that they were or felt obliged to table in our discussion. So they wanted a John Lewis photographed timber floor which would have lacked any sole, it would have been new, and in a final attempt to try and get my decision overturned, he said he was going to take a sample of the floor to somebody within the council to check its slip resistance. And I said, my God, you've got an officer in the council that deals with slip resistance of floors. You know, what on earth, you know, have we, what a mess have we got ourselves in if that's the case, if that's the decision. My choice was based upon the reuse of an existing floor and the inherent character that that goes with that, and the atmosphere that would create within the building. You know, you want to, when you're sitting down, you want to be sat on something that's actually nice to be around. And eventually I got my way, but not only because I was tenacious and knew my way around the system enough to know that this was worth pursuing, but that is symptomatic of the fundamental problems that we have, that the reuse of existing light fittings from the 1950s, you know, and getting that through the necessary building control approvals. You know, all of those issues, we really are facing an uphill battle for designers and specifiers of materials to get them accepted into reuse. And you know, we do it in very deviant ways, delightfully, but that's open to me because I don't have anybody to answer to, and I can take the responsibility on for the actions that I take. It's not open to you as an architect because unfortunately you've got a client and you've got others, and it becomes increasingly difficult for these guys to prosecute what I would consider to be good practice in the built environment, because there are people that are controlling you who feel that they ought to stop you.
It goes back in this communication of value, whether you are leading, you know, this is really valuable for the character of the building versus the value of the material from a cost perspective or reconditioning perspective, and it's very diverse.
Can I just add to that? Yeah,
sure.
I agree with everything you've said. I suppose what I wanted to comment on is some of the newer buildings have been reconverted that I see. I'm not talking about Manchester, just generally, whereby, say, you've got an office block, which is then being converted into residential, and it seems to be. It comes back to what we're saying again. What is it that the community would like to see? Where would they like to live? And some of them that I've seen are very close to very, very big roundabouts, very heavy traffic, really, I'll have to be honest, poor design. Would you want to live, you know? And I just think it's almost like, don't do anything that you wouldn't want to live in there yourself. And I take on board that there's a housing shortage, but still, you know, try not to do anything that you wouldn't want to live in yourself.
Yeah.
It's a really valuable point, that Teo. When I was a CABE commissioner and I used to sit on there were 18 of us or 16 of us, I can't remember, and I used to do two things. I used to ask my fellow CABE commissioners what kind of houses did they live in. And the majority of them lived in kind of Victorian, Georgian, tastefully, with a dash of tasteful modernism, no doubt, integrated into the fabric of an existing building. And the other was to ask them which which are the most popular places, which are the places where people choose to live. So not only the house, but where do you choose to live? Yeah. And ask them if that place would exist now within the current planning framework. And of course, they wouldn't. These places that are often most desirable and most charming, and often historic, wouldn't exist today because they wouldn't get planning permission. And there's a fundamental hypocrisy, an innate hypocrisy within the built environment that, which is picking up the point that you just made. It is, is that a space in which you would want to live? When I was a visiting professor of architecture at Yale in the States in 2007, 2008, and I used to get the kids there. I said to them, I want you to come to me and I want you to draw your favourite space. I want you to, it could be in your grandma's front room, it could be sat underneath a tree, it could be, I want you to communicate your favourite place to be to me as an exercise. And then I'd say, why the hell aren't you designing spaces like that? And the reason, and forgive me, it's all to do with architecture, and it's to do with the space that I came through on the way up here, which were the crypt pits. That actually architects grow up trying to impress their peers and not impress the mums. Because they grow up with this fundamental education that says it's your chance now and you've got to get up there and you've got to be more radical or cooler than anybody else. And I think that actually making people consider which spaces do you like, what makes you feel comfortable, doesn't mean to say that we'd end up with anything that's less cool, but it just means that it might be a little bit more human than it would otherwise be if it was simply reviewed by your architectural peers. Yeah,
and I think that definition is changing as well. Like maybe the cool definition in the past was like fancy geometry, fancy shapes, but now it's going back. Actually, if I am able to successfully retrofit a building in some ways or maintain the character, it's now seen as the very, very cool thing to do, especially for my generation of architects.
Yeah, my experience of the students coming through the university, they understand and they want to preserve that history. It is kind of, it's something that is a passion within them. So, and yeah, we certainly see it, that desire to adapt the historical fabric, the terraced houses, how we can upgrade them and keep that housing stock, which is the largest houses. Terraced houses is one of the largest housing stock we've got within the UK. And that is something we're looking at with a couple of the local councils, Cheshire East Council at the minute. So yeah, I think there is a shift within it, and I do see that within the students as well.
It just this discussion has just reminded me of something that happened decades ago, and an important point I think, which is about a word I like to use a lot, which is connectivity. And many decades ago, my nephew came to stay with his grandma and had a lovely few days. And when he was leaving, he turned round to my mother and said, and these are honest words, he said, "Grandma, where you live is like paradise. Everything is on your doorstep." And that was the words of a 4-year-old.
Yeah, very profound. Well, thank you so much. We're going to start to wrap up, but some parting words and some call to actions for our online audience and members. If we're about to adopt retrofits at scale, and we need to increase more and more retrofits throughout the UK, especially, what would be your sort of key takeaways or key pieces of advice of what people who want to get started today or now, let's say?
I think, the greenest buildings are the buildings that already exist. Yeah, to work with that, add to that kind of history, that sense of pride, and the atmosphere that those buildings already maintain, and build upon it.
Thank you.
It's a big ask, but we're going to be lost if we don't do something about it, and to fundamentally change our value system so that things that are environmentally responsible, however one would define that, are more are cheaper, are more accessible than things that are not, because at the moment the reverse is true.
Thank you.
And I would say it's an amazing area to work in for all those people, whether it be young or old, or the students going through, where you feel that you're doing good, and that's a really nice feeling. And the other message I'd like to say is often I hear rightly about the climate anxiety, particularly amongst younger people. And what I would like to say is there's people like us and many others that for decades and decades have been trying to smash the hammer and made small progress. So please never ever feel that nobody's thought about it, nobody's done anything. We have, it's just taken a very long time. And hopefully you guys will be able to do it a lot quicker.
Yeah, and that's a call for us to keep going at it, despite everything that's happening in the world. So I want to wrap up there. Thank you so much for your contributions. It's been really awesome to hear from you.
Thank you so much. Thanks again, team. Really, really great session. Okay, our colleagues out there online, what we invite you to do now is go and check out 4 fantastic little films. They're 4 how-tos. Each one is just 15 minutes long. Go and check them out. If you don't check them out right now, they will be available on the Design Council YouTube station afterwards. Also want to say thank you so much for all the questions and keep them coming. Bye for now. See you in a bit.